Welcome to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is J.Ladd, who's been helping families for over 25 years. She's been listed in the Washingtonian as one of the top mental health professionals in this area, and I'm very excited to have her here today. Thanks for being here, Jill.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here to talk about this really important issue.
Absolutely. So, in the last couple of segments, we finally started talking about issues that happen when couples are breaking up, right? In the first year, I was trying to focus more on staying together. But 50% of all marriages will probably wind up in divorce, and it's usually in the first 7 years, which means that there are usually kids involved because that's when people are having kids in those first 7 years. So in your experience, one thing I want to cover is how do parents break the news to their kids?
Well, that's an important piece.
Right.
2/3 of all divorces have minor children. So we have 1 million children a year who become children of divorce. So that's a huge number.
That is huge.
The research on children of divorce is actually pretty bleak about how kids do. But that's research for children and parents who haven't necessarily had help through the process. So having a guide to know how to do it right, to mitigate as much of the fallout as possible, is a key ingredient. And so from the very start, I like to have parents talk with each other about what it's going to look like. What do they want to tell the children? And if possible, and it's not always possible, as you know, to get two separating or divorcing parents to work together.
Right.
But for the sake of the children, if they can do that, it really sets a tone for the rest of the separation divorce process. So part of breaking the news is to join together and come up with what's the story that we're going to tell the children about what's happened.
Like a shared narrative.
Like a shared narrative about why this is happening to them. Breaking the news is about scripting together. What are we going to tell them? Who's going to say what? Not everybody is capable of doing that because parents are so emotionally raw themselves. So I really try to help the parents get themselves together first. They need to have their time to cry, to grieve, and then shift to preparing their children for what's about to come. So it's a preparation phase. Ideally, I would have them set the stage where the two of them together will sit down with the children.
Okay.
And they will have worked out who's going to talk about why this is happening, who might talk about what the details will be of what's to follow, and prepare themselves because it's like their life preserver for when they're speaking to their children so they don't break down. Not that it's a bad thing to show your emotions. If you tear up while you're telling your children about really the worst thing that's probably happened to them in their lives so far, that's okay. It's okay to be sad about that. It's okay to model. This is very emotional.
Right.
And it's not to say that parents can't more spontaneously add things in, but it's really getting a sense of we are sitting down here together today because our statement to you is we are still your parents. Even if we're not together, we're still going to take care of you. So from the get-go, you're establishing that we're still a parenting unit, even if we're not spouses.
Oh, I think that's key. And the other thing that I think is key is sort of rehearsing ahead of time the script that is really appropriate, because there is no bigger pet peeve than I have than when parents just, take it upon themselves to tell their kids something like horrible, like, well, your dad's moving out because he's having an affair. Okay, really? The kids don't need to know that. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Gearing it toward the age of the children, the temperament of the children. Do you have a child who has difficulty with transitions? Well, they're going to need more lead time to help them adjust.
Good point.
Their personality style, their individual ways of coping in general is going to come into play with this big crisis that's coming down the pike. And they're going to feel out of control. So part of the other goal in breaking the news meeting is to say this is what's going to happen. And so what that means is parents really have to get their act together to know what's going to happen. So they have to know who's going to be where, when it's going to happen, and reassure the children about what's staying the same and what might change.
Like, are they switching schools, or are they switching homes?
Absolutely.
Right, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And where is mom or dad going to be? Is someone staying in the family home? Are there going to be 2 new homes sooner than later? But as much predictability you can give to the child, it helps them to feel a little more secure, because they're going to be very anxious because they don't know, how is this going to change? What's going to be happening? So preparing them for, and I say generally a week or 2 ahead. This should not be a hit and run. This should not be, Dad's packing at 10 o'clock at night and heading out the door.
Oh, yeah, that would be bad.
That's really bad, because it says life is very uncertain. I don't know if a bad thing's going to happen to me at any turn. And there's a certain reality to that. We none know what's going to happen to us. But you want your family to be your safe place. You want that to be your secure block from which you launch into the world. So creating that sense of safety. And I'll even suggest to parents, well, first of all, don't do it when your kids are tired or headed out the door. Try to find, if possible, a morning time where you're going to have the afternoon where they can just be with the parents. And even take a field trip to where the second home's going to be. If both parents are willing to go, that's great, because it's saying, I kind of endorse this. This is where you're also going to go. See, I can handle this, and so can you. And so you have the field trip. You might even plan something later in the afternoon to go get ice cream, go to a movie together. It's still saying, we're a family that's going through changes, but we're still a family.
No, that's a great point. Now, I also find it funny that people have a hard time telling others, not just breaking the news to the kids, but to people at work or even to their own, like, moms or dads. I mean, I'm really shocked by that people have a really hard time sharing the news with others. So why do you think that is?
There's still a lot of shame associated with separating and divorcing. For a lot of people, it's an indication that they've failed at this major life endeavor. And so there's embarrassment, there can be some humiliation or shame, even to one's own family, that, I couldn't do it. And they're reluctant to share the news because they're afraid of how they'll be viewed. They might be very successful in their work, but now they're exposing a vulnerability or a weakness to their boss, who maybe never thought of them as being so vulnerable before. So I think it really is the exposure element. Sometimes with families, it's also they don't necessarily want to have to deal with other people's reactions to what they're going through. They're having a hard enough time handling their own feelings, let alone mom's sadness about, oh, you're getting separated, you're getting divorced, or the worries about the grandchildren. It's a lot to carry.
But the thing is, especially if you're going through, it doesn't matter whether you're going through litigation or mediation or collaborative, you're going to have to take time off of work to go to these sessions and work on your issues, right? So sooner or later, you do need to let people know. Like when dad is moving out or mom is moving out, you need to tell the other relatives, what's going on. So how do you help people break the news?
Well, you gear it to your audience. If it's your boss, keeping it simple and straightforward. You don't have to reveal all the details of it. I think sometimes when people are emotionally raw in particular, they may share more than they wanted to share, and they're worried about that. They're worried they're going to cry in front of their boss. So you do need some time to regroup, but I think just simply saying, I just wanted to let you know I'm going through a separation and divorce right now, and I may need some time off here and there. I'll use my annual leave for that, but I just wanted to give you the heads up about that.
You think rehearsing helps?
Absolutely. I think rehearsing is that life preserver, to hang on to have your script, to prepare yourself is very useful. With family, they may want to ask a lot of details. And I think it's okay to have your boundaries there, too, and say, I really don't want to discuss all of that right now. It's very upsetting to me. I'll tell you, on an as-needed basis. and and I'm going to need your help, and these are the ways you can help me.
What do you think most people struggle with when they're going through the divorce, emotionally?
Yeah, well, it's a roller coaster. There's sadness, and there's anger. There's really grieving, and sometimes it's not just grieving the loss of the person themselves. It's grieving the dream of what they thought they would have. I didn't expect to have 2 children and be divorced in year 7. I thought I'd grow old with this person, and we'd share all these lifetime events for our kids, and we'd have grandchildren together, and that's a dream. And so sometimes it's easier to say goodbye to the person because you're mad at them, or you can't stand them anymore. But that dream can never really be recaptured. It may be starting over and having a new dream, but it's also saying goodbye to the dream. And that brings up a lot of anxiety for people. Often people get very depressed because of the situation they're in. So that's kind of normative to be up and down. But we also have who's the leavor and who's the leavee.
Right.
So the person who has said, I want out, if it's not mutual, often is ahead of the other spouse in terms of their process of getting ready to leave. So they may be through the sadness of it. They may have been grieving for a period of time thinking this isn't going to work. But once they break the news themselves to the partner, then they may feel guilty. And then they're dealing with the partner's sadness, maybe their rage, maybe their disbelief. And it creates a lot of ambivalence. So there's a lot of ambivalence in separation and divorce. Should I be doing this? Could we work it out? Should we stay together for the children?
When you're dealing with people that are going through this, and you're dealing with their, situational depression or situational anxiety, and dealing with the breaking of the news to the family, kids, bosses, and everything else, do you also help them kind of figure out a parenting plan about how they're actually going to share custody now that they're going to be in 2 separate homes?
Well, that's certainly an important element. It's key. It's the keystone for co-parenting. So the parenting plan is your roadmap to how are we going to take care of these children together? How are we going to execute the caretaking? So it is, as you well know, it's the schedule. The schedule, again, is key in terms of which parent is seeing the child when, how much time with each parent. Do we have a parent who travels a lot? So maybe they are less available to see the child. So you might not have a 50-50 arrangement just because they're not free to do that.
Right.
So you're really looking to, based again on the ages of the children, because if you have much younger children, they need more frequent contact but of shorter duration.
Right.
So you're trying to gear it to the needs of the children, as well as incorporate the needs of the parents and their work schedules. That's one of the key issues that I look at, is providing enough access to both parents for the child, but minimizing the number of transitions a kid has to make, like in the course of a week.
Right.
So sometimes parents will want to do, we'll do 2 days and 2 days, and it's, the child is living out of a suitcase. And for parents who have done the nesting arrangement, which is the children stay put, but the parents rotate in and out, and have a separate place. Either they share outside of the house where one is in the marital home, one's out. When parents have done that, they hate it because they hate shuffling back and forth and thinking, what did I forget? So it really gives them a taste of what the kids go through.
Right.
And the tracking. So looking at the schedules for regular life, holiday schedules, birthdays, how is all that going to be managed? Who takes kids to a doctor's appointment, dentist appointment? How do you handle if a kid gets sick? Well, I tend to think of it, who's the parent on duty that day? Who's the responsible one for the well-being of the child or children that day? But people work it out differently. If a parent works at home, they may say, well, if the child's sick, they can come over here and be with me. So how much flexibility is in the system is determined by the personalities of the parents, how they're getting along, how amicable the separation divorce is.
Right.
The more flexibility, the better adjustment the kids will make. But there still has to be a skeletal structure.
Right.
that's your default mode. You don't want to reinvent the wheel every week. Okay, you have them Tuesday and Wednesday, then I'll take them, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So you want to really minimize how much shifting around there is, but make sure they have time enough with both parents.
Makes sense. So we're going to take a short break, and then we will be right back.
This financial advisor is being accused of committing one of the largest investment frauds in the history of the United States.
I guess we're not going to Aspen. That's fine. You see, I like tennis balls. He likes insider trading. So he's going to jail and I'm going to a shelter. And no, they're not the same thing. Shelters are for good pets that want to be adopted. Jails are for criminals. I did nothing. Uh-oh. Okay, I stole a cheeseburger once on my dog.
Welcome back to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is J.Ladd, and we're talking about how parents can help their children through a divorce. Thanks so much for being here, Jill.
I'm glad to be here.
So we're talking about these parenting plans, right? And meanwhile, you've already brought up the fact that some people might be not quite themselves because they're dealing with their own anxiety, their own depression, all this other stuff. So surely you must see that there's some issues that come up when they're working out these co-parenting arrangements. What are typical things that come up?
Well, certainly how parents handle different areas of his child's life. There may be decisions that are medical decisions that have to be made. If a child has Lyme's disease, there can be a controversy about what's the treatment that we're going to pursue. Well, I have this doctor and I want to see that doctor. So navigating some of these basic issues of schooling, religious schooling, as well as the private versus the public school.
Right.
Whatever was there before the separation and divorce, that was a difference in either parenting styles. You may have a parent who is a more authoritarian, very structured parent, and you may have a parent who's more flexible, democratic parent. That's going to be amplified.
Right. In two different houses.
In two different houses and through this process. You actually have less influence and control over your spouse and over the other parent in separation divorce than you had in marriage. You have less leverage than you did.
Right.
Right. So you're trying to work together and create like a new regime for how we operate. So creating a better communication between the parents is part of the goal of the work that I do.
Right. And maybe learning how to pick your battles, right?
And learning how to pick your battles.
One of the funniest things I had in the case was this man who wanted to put in the agreement that his wife would never take the children to McDonald's. He had this thing about McDonald's. I'm like, sir, we can't do that. You're going to have to learn to let that go.
You're having to accept that that parent is in charge of that home.
Right.
If there's particular fallout, for example, if you do have a parent who keeps a child up very late at night, doesn't have rules around bedtime, and the child is coming back exhausted, the teacher's telling you they're falling asleep in their classes, then you have an issue that you need to address with the other parent and to give the feedback. Gee, this is what I'm noticing. But not to do it in an attacking way, but more in a problem-solving way.
Makes sense.
I'm usually saying to parents, look, we're now into the business of how to raise the children and to remind them to try to use business language. How would they conduct themselves in a meeting at work and express themselves? So you really want to get them out of the amygdala, the primitive brain that has the reactive emotions, and more into the analytical brain that can calmly look at, okay, this is the problem, and I'm understanding this is how you're feeling about it. Can we shift to solving that for the best interest of our children?
Makes sense. So how would parents know that their children are having a hard time adjusting?
Well, sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's obvious.
Okay.
Sometimes it's very explicit. They're having trouble getting to sleep. You see a change in their eating patterns, a change in how they're relating to their peers. Of course, how they're doing in school is a key indicator. Are they more aggressive with their peers? Because they're angry about what's happened. And children will be angry at their parents as well as sad about what's happened.
Interesting.
So you will see it show up in a lot of different forums. And it's really paying attention. They may get very quiet. Often kids don't ask a lot of questions. but they're kind of just going along with the program, but maybe more of a sullen mood. And some of that's normal. When I've got into a school to do an observation of a child who's going through their parents' separation or divorce, and you can see children in a circle, and often you'll see the child's more on the periphery of the circle, not really tuned into what's going on. It's like they're trying to process internally, not with even knowing what they're processing. They're off somewhere. You can see it in their eyes that they're trying to get a handle on what's happened to them. So you will see a change in maybe their ability to pay attention and concentrate. So they may need some extra help with that. And often the demands of the children increase because now you're a single parent. You have your own emotional fallout to deal with.
Right.
So often parents have less energy and resources available. But that's really the time that their child needs them the most. You know, you would see for a period of weeks or maybe a few months where a child's going through that. And if it's not getting better, then they really do need some explicit help.
Right.
You know, from a child therapist, family therapist, maybe working with the school counselor. Often for kids, getting them into a group is very useful because it says, I'm not the only one this is happening to.
Right.
Because talk about not telling people. Sometimes kids don't mention what's happening at home to anybody, to their closest friends. You know, and the kid will discover it when they come over for a play date and, gee, Dad's never there anymore. So there's a lot of adjustments, and it's not just one time. With each phase, there's a new adjustment.
So what are some tips you would give to parents when they start dating once again?
Well, the first tip is don't really bring anyone around your child that you're not seriously involved with and very interested in having a long-term relationship with. It's not that you have to have a totally secret life. I think parents can allude to, well, you know, Mommy sometimes, you know, is going out and meeting new friends. There's a fine line between how much to share and how much not to share. But the main thing about holding back is you don't want your child to attach to somebody that may not stick around. They've already gone through a significant loss that their parents aren't together.
That's a great point.
So you don't want them to have to go through sadness and grieving the loss of this new person that they happen to like a lot. So I think that's one key point in terms of dating. You know, you're excited doesn't mean necessarily they're going to be excited when you do introduce them, you know.
Right. Right. I mean, it's got to be weird for them.
It's weird because the first thing it signals is, uh-oh, there's no chance they're getting back together.
Right.
You know, what's interesting is you can have a child draw a picture of their family years after divorce, and they'll still draw the nuclear family, the initial family.
Yeah, my son still does that.
So
7 years later.
7 years after.
Yeah.
And the parent can even be remarried, and they're still drawing pictures of the original family. So, you know, they're still hoping in a fantasy way, you know, that maybe they'll get back together. So short of a situation where there maybe has been physical abuse, verbal abuse, something really that has made the child explicitly unhappy, scared, kids want their parents together. They don't really care about our happiness. You know, it's more about why did this have to happen to me, and how does this affect me?
Right.
Because they're egocentric by nature.
So when couples are, let's say they get past the dating phase and they're remarrying, going to this point about how does this affect me, so do they have to be extra sensitive to the kids when this marriage is taking place and maybe realize that the kid might not be so happy about the marriage occurring?
Well, I think you can kind of count on it on some level. You know, even if they like the person, it's still a big adjustment. They may have fears about, is this person going to try to replace my mom or my dad?
Okay.
Am I going to betray the other parent if I like this person and I'm living with them? They may be worried, how's the other parent going to respond? You know, particularly, you know, if it's the, you know, it's like, it's my dad. Are you going to be my dad? You know?
Right.
And how will my dad feel about you acting as if you're, you know, an important parent figure to me? So a lot of those concerns are very real. And I actually also liken it to the issue of sibling rivalry. they now have to share you. And there may have been a period of time where if it's, just the two of you or three of you, you've gotten closer. So now it's even harder to adjust because now I have all your attention. Now I have to share you with this other person. And so it's more like having a sibling come along and having to make the adjustments of we have to learn to share again. And some of the antidote to that issue is ensuring that you have your separate time, that you have your one-on-one time with that child. It's not the same for it to be the three of you or four of you. It's different when it's one, the original parent, the birth parent with the child or children. Often the parent is so excited about having found love again, they want everybody to be together. It's like, oh, we'll all go and do this. And that's great part of the time. But it also needs to be the reassurance of, you still have me. It looks different sometimes, but we still have our connection. And really validating that. And we have our special relationship.
Yeah, I have to say, even though I've been doing this for over 14 years, now that I'm getting remarried, I realized that, I had this vision of blended family. You put all the different fruit pieces in the blender, and you get this awesome smoothie instantaneously. And it's really not working out that way. It's more like a fruit salad and trying to convince the orange to sit alongside the strawberry with the banana and a pineapple, right? And the one good thing about my son is that he's actually really good about saying, can we just spend the day together, or can we just go and do our own thing one-on-one? And we've been really good about trying to do that.
So he puts his needs out there. He's very clear.
He does, but I guess I'm wondering, not everybody's like that.
A lot of kids won't say a word.
Interesting.
Okay, they'll internalize it because if the parent's happy, they don't want to cause them grief. They don't want to disappoint them.
Okay.
So they'll protect the parent and not say anything. They won't lobby for their needs. Okay, and you mentioned it's not just they may get this one new person, they may get 2, 3, 4 new people. And there's no such thing as instant relationship. It takes time to build a connection. And you may have kids who are like oil and water. They just don't mesh. And often there's a subtle pressure from the parents. Like each other. Could you guys just like each other? Can't we all get along?
Right.
But it really takes time. It took time for you to get to know the person, your fiance you're going to marry, and to get to know his children, and for him to get to know your child. It takes even longer in some ways for the siblings, because there may be some very distinct differences in personalities. There could be a huge gap in ages.
Right.
So, the fantasy is we're going to be the Brady Bunch.
Right.
When the reality is, like you said, well, we're still two families, trying to overlap. That's even why in a lot of families you'll see there's a new child that's, of the union of the two new partners. It's kind of a way to bridge some of the blending.
Interesting.
It's really not the solution. The solution is it takes time and experiences to form relationships. And you don't want to put a pressure on anybody to feel like they have to do it immediately. And, they need to do it in their own time and to feel like they have choices. So.
That's a great point. So if somebody wanted to contact you for further information, how could they do that?
Well, you could go to my website, which is www.abetterwayforcouples.com.
Okay.
Or call me at 301-309-8824. That's
Great.
the simplest way.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Making It Laugh.